The champagne glass slipped from my fingers as my wife Brianna caught her sister's bouquet, turned to the crowd of wedding guests, and announced with a drunken laugh, "Maybe I'll use this for my second marriage." The crystal shattered against the marble floor of the country club, but nobody noticed. They were too busy laughing at her next line. "This one doesn't count. I'm just practicing." I'm Eliot Foster, and I'd been married to Bree for 6 years. 6 years of her treating me like a placeholder, a warm body to pay half the mortgage while she figured out what she really wanted. Standing there in my rented tuxedo, watching 300 people laugh at my expense, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, I was past that. This was calculation. "Eli's such a good sport," Bree continued, swaying slightly as she gestured toward me with the bouquet. "He knows I married down. My parents told me so at our wedding." More laughter. Her mother, Patricia, nodded approvingly from the head table, her Botoxed face managing what passed for a smile. I forced my own smile and raised my beer bottle. "To practice marriages," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "May they end when the real thing comes along." The crowd cheered, thinking I was playing along. But Bree's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew me well enough to catch the edge in my voice. Good. Let her wonder. Later that night, as we drove home to our little house on Maple Street, Bree was quiet. The alcohol was wearing off, and I could see her replaying the evening in her head. She'd gone too far, even by her standards. "You know I was just joking, right?" she said, as I pulled into our driveway. "Everyone knows I love you." I turned off the engine and looked at her, really looked at her. Bree was beautiful. Long blonde hair, green eyes, the kind of smile that made strangers trust her instantly. She'd been homecoming queen in high school, had dated the quarterback, had always expected life to hand her everything on a silver platter. Instead, she'd married a handyman who fixed other people's problems for a living. "Sure, Bree. Just joking." Inside, she headed straight for the bathroom to wash off her makeup. I went to the kitchen and opened my laptop. For the past 3 months, I'd been documenting everything. Bank statements showing mysterious cash withdrawals, credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, text messages on her phone that she thought she'd deleted, photos. Especially the photos. I'd hired Tommy Ricci, a private investigator who owed me a favor after I'd rewired his office for free. Tommy was thorough. The manila envelope he'd given me last week contained everything I needed. Time-stamped photos of Bree entering and leaving the seaside motel with Gavin Russo, owner of Russo's Auto Detailing. Photos of them kissing in his Camaro behind the marina. Even a photo of them having lunch with Bree's best friend Mel, who was clearly in on the whole thing. But the real treasure was the audio recording. Tommy had managed to bug Gavin's shop, and he'd caught Bree and Gavin planning their future together. They were going to wait until after her sister's wedding, then Bree would file for divorce and take me for everything I was worth. Gavin had laughed and said, "The poor bastard has no idea what's coming." He was right. I'd had no idea what was coming. But now I did. I printed out the divorce papers I'd been preparing for weeks and set them on the kitchen table next to her morning coffee mug. Then I went upstairs and packed the rest of my clothes. I'd been slowly moving things to the furnished apartment I'd rented across town, but tonight I was finishing the job. Bree was already asleep when I came back downstairs with my last suitcase. She was snoring softly, her mouth slightly open, mascara smudged despite her face-washing routine. 6 years ago, I would have found it endearing. Now, it just looked pathetic. I left the house keys on top of the divorce papers and walked out the door. The night air was crisp, carrying the salt smell from the harbor. Our little town of Millfield, Maine, was picture-perfect on the surface. White picket fences, tree-lined streets, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which was exactly what I was counting on. My phone buzzed as I loaded my car. A text from Mitch, my best friend and business partner. "How'd it go?" I typed back, "Practice time's over." I was sitting in Mitch's tow truck at 6:30 the next morning when Bree's frantic phone call came through. I'd been expecting it. Eli? Eli, what the hell is this? Where are you? I put her on speaker so Mitch could hear. He grinned and took a sip of his coffee. We were parked across from the Dunkin' Donuts on Main Street, watching the town wake up. Good morning, Bree. I trust you found my paperwork. This isn't funny, Eli. Come home right now. We need to talk about this. Actually, we don't. My lawyer will be in touch about the details, but it's pretty straightforward. No kids, no shared assets except the house, which you can keep since your parents paid for most of it anyway. There was a long pause. I could practically hear her brain working, trying to figure out how much I knew. Eli, I know you're upset about last night. I was drunk. I didn't mean... Oh, you meant it. That's the first honest thing you've said in months. Another pause. Then her voice changed, became softer, more manipulative. Baby, please. Come home. Let's talk about this like adults. I am being an adult. That's why I'm not coming home to find you and Gavin in our bed. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she whispered, What did you say? You heard me. Tell Gavin I said hi. And Bree, you might want to call in sick to work today. You're going to be busy. I hung up and turned to Mitch. Phase 1 complete. Mitch Kowalski had been my best friend since high school. He was built like a linebacker, with hands the size of dinner plates and a laugh that could shake windows. He'd also been through his own messy divorce 3 years ago, so he understood exactly what I was going through. So what's phase 2? He asked. We're going to help Bree with her car trouble. What car trouble? I smiled. The trouble she's about to have. We drove to Bree's office building downtown. She worked as a social media manager for a local marketing firm, a job her father had gotten her through his business connections. Her little red Honda was parked in its usual spot, the one with her name on a reserved sign. You sure about this? Mitch asked as he positioned the tow truck. She's been taking my car to meet Gavin while I'm at work. Seems fair that she gets to experience some transportation issues of her own. We hooked up her car and drove it to Mitch's impound lot on the edge of town. Perfectly legal. I was still technically her husband, and the car was registered in both our names. I left a note on her windshield. Practicing for single life. You'll need to learn how to handle things on your own. E. By the time we got to the lobster trap for lunch, the whole town was buzzing. The lobster trap was Millfield's unofficial gossip headquarters, a dimly lit bar where everyone from fishermen to bank managers came to drink beer and share rumors. The bartender, Sally, had been serving drinks there for 20 years and knew everyone's secrets. Eli Foster, she called out as we walked in. Heard you had some excitement this morning. News traveled fast in a small town. Bree had probably called half her friends by now, spinning some story about how I'd gone crazy and stolen her car. But I had allies, too. Just helping my wife practice being independent, I said, sliding onto a bar stool. She's been talking about it a lot lately. Sally laughed and poured me a beer. That girl's got some nerve, I'll give her that. Did you hear what she said at the wedding last night? I was there. Course you were. Well, let me tell you, my cousin Rita was working that wedding, and she said Bree was making quite the spectacle of herself, dancing with every man there except her own husband. I took a sip of my beer and said nothing. Sometimes the best way to spread information was to let other people do the talking. Rita said she saw Bree sneaking off to the parking lot with some guy in a fancy car. Real flashy type, you know? Gold chains and hair gel. That would be Gavin. I'd been wondering how long it would take for someone to notice. Mitch ordered a burger and changed the subject to the Red Sox, but I could see the other customers glancing at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. By tomorrow, everyone in Millfield would know that Eli Foster's marriage was in trouble. By the end of the week, they'd know why. My phone buzzed with another text from Bree. I know you took my car. Bring it back right now or I'm calling the police. I showed the message to Mitch, who snorted. What's she gonna tell them? That her husband legally towed a car he co-owns? I typed back, call them. Make sure to mention that you've been practicing for your second marriage. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. No response to that one. Around 2 o'clock, Mel walked into the bar. Melanie Pierce had been Bree's best friend since elementary school, and she was exactly the kind of person who thrived on drama. She had short, dark hair, wore too much makeup, and had opinions about everything. She was also, according to Tommy's investigation, the one who'd been covering for Bree's affair from the beginning. She spotted me immediately and marched over, her high heels clicking on the wooden floor. "Eli Foster, you should be ashamed of yourself," she announced loudly enough for the whole bar to hear. "Abandoning your wife like this, and stealing her car, what kind of man does that?" I turned slowly on my bar stool and looked at her. The kind of man whose wife has been practicing for her second marriage, apparently. Mel's face went red. That was a joke. She was drunk. Was she drunk at the Seaside Motel last Tuesday afternoon? The bar went completely quiet. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs. Mel's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed. "Sure you don't." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to one of Tommy's photos. "Want to see the pictures?" Mel grabbed for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Easy there, Mel. Wouldn't want you to get in trouble for assault, too." "Two?" Her voice was getting shrill. "Well, you've already got accessory to adultery covered." "What's the legal term for helping someone cheat on their spouse? Accomplice? Enabler?" Mitch was trying not to laugh. Sally was pretending to clean glasses while listening to every word. The other customers weren't even pretending. They were staring openly. "You're crazy," Mel said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe. But I'm not the one who's been lying to an entire town for months." "Tell me, Mel, how long have you known about Gavin?" She turned and practically ran out of the bar. I finished my beer and left a generous tip for Sally. By evening, everyone in Millfield would know that Bree's affair was an open secret among her friends. By tomorrow, they'd be wondering what else she'd been hiding. As Mitch and I walked back to his truck, he shook his head admiringly. "You're cold, man. Remind me never to get on your bad side." "I'm just getting started," I said. "Wait until you see what I've got planned for Gavin." The next morning, I drove to the marina. Millfield's harbor was its crown jewel, a picturesque collection of fishing boats, pleasure craft, and weathered docks that looked like something from a postcard. It was also where Gavin kept his pride and joy, a 28-foot cabin cruiser called Easy Money. I'd done electrical work on half the boats in the harbor, so nobody questioned my presence. I nodded to Frank DeLuca, who was loading supplies onto his lobster boat, and walked casually down Dock C. Gavin's boat was exactly what you'd expect from a guy who drove a gold Camaro and wore more jewelry than most women. Everything was polished to a mirror shine, from the chrome fittings to the oversized outboard motors. The name was painted in flowing script across the stern, with Millfield ME underneath in smaller letters. I wasn't there to sabotage anything yet. I was there to gather intelligence. Tommy had mentioned that Gavin often brought women to his boat, but I wanted to see the setup for myself. The cabin windows were tinted, and there was a convenient tarp that could be pulled across the rear deck for privacy. Very romantic, very discreet. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" I turned to find Gavin himself walking down the dock, carrying a cooler and wearing a smug grin. He was shorter than me, maybe 5'8", but he made up for it with an aggressive confidence that had probably served him well in high school. His dark hair was slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a boat, and his shirt was unbuttoned just far enough to show off his gold chains. "Nice boat," I said neutrally. "Must have cost a fortune." "Business is good." He set down the cooler and looked me over. "You're Eli Foster, right? Bree's husband?" "That's right. I detailed your wife's car a few months back. Sweet little Honda. She's a real looker, your wife." There was something in his tone that made my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. "Yes, she is. You're a lucky man." He was studying my face, looking for a reaction. Course, luck can change, you know? Sometimes what you think is yours isn't really yours at all. Is that right? Oh yeah, I've seen it happen. Guy thinks he's got it all figured out, thinks his woman is happy at home, meanwhile she's out looking for something better. He leaned against his boat, completely relaxed. Sometimes she finds it too. I nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like you speak from experience. I pay attention. This is a small town, Eli. People talk. They say your marriage isn't exactly solid. People say a lot of things. They do. They also say you moved out a couple days ago. Left your wife high and dry. He grinned. Can't say I blame you. Woman like that, she's got needs. If her husband can't meet them, well, nature abhors a vacuum, you know. I wanted to punch his smug face, but that would have been exactly the wrong move. Instead, I smiled. You're absolutely right, Gavin. Nature does abhor a vacuum. Thanks for the reminder. I walked away, leaving him looking slightly confused. He'd expected me to get angry, maybe even take a swing at him. Instead, I'd given him nothing to work with, but I'd learned plenty. From the marina, I drove to Russo's Auto Detailing. It was located in a strip mall between a pizza place and a nail salon, with a big neon sign and pictures of expensive cars in the windows. Through the glass door, I could see Gavin's employees working on a BMW. I parked across the street and called Tommy Ricci. I need more information about Gavin's business, I said when he answered. What kind of information? The kind that explains how a guy who details cars can afford a $60,000 boat. Tommy was quiet for a moment. You think he's into something shady? I think guys like Gavin don't get rich washing cars. There's got to be something else. I'll make some calls. Give me a day or two. That afternoon, I went back to work. I had 3 jobs scheduled. Installing a ceiling fan for Mrs. Henderson, fixing a garbage disposal for the Ryans, and rewiring an outlet at the library. Normal, everyday problems that normal people needed solved. It felt good to focus on something concrete, something I could actually fix. But everywhere I went, people wanted to talk about my marriage. Mrs. Henderson, who was 85 and had lived in Millfield her entire life, made me coffee and asked pointed questions about Bree's behavior at the wedding. The Ryans, a young couple with 2 kids, were more subtle but equally curious. Even the librarian, a stern woman named Miss. Carlyle managed to work the conversation around to the challenges of modern marriage. By 5 o'clock, I was exhausted from dodging questions and deflecting sympathy. I drove to my apartment, a small 1-bedroom place above a used bookstore, and tried to relax. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No memories of Bree, no reminders of 6 wasted years. My phone rang just as I was opening a beer. The caller ID showed Bree's number. What do you want, Bree? I want my car back, and I want you to stop spreading lies about me. I haven't told a single lie. You told people I was at a motel. Were you? Silence. Bree, I'm going to give you some free advice. The hole you're in is already pretty deep. Maybe stop digging. This is insane, Eli. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can get divorced. That's what you wanted, remember? You were just practicing with me. I was drunk. You were honest. For once in your life, you were completely honest about how you feel about our marriage. I'm just giving you what you asked for. I could hear her crying, but it didn't move me the way it once would have. I'd seen her cry before, usually when she wanted something or when she'd been caught in a lie. This was no different. Eli, please. I love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of being married. You love having someone to pay half the bills, and you love having a backup plan in case your other options don't work out. But you don't love me. That's not true. Then why were you planning to divorce me and take everything I own? Another long silence. How did you... She stopped herself, but it was too late. How did I what, Bree? How did I find out about your plan? Maybe the same way I found out about Gavin, and the motel, and Mel's involvement, and everything else you thought you were hiding. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. We're done, Bree. Sign the papers, keep the house, and move on with your life. Find someone who wants to be your practice husband. I'm retiring from that job. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, things were going to get interesting. I was replacing a light switch at the hardware store the next morning when my phone started buzzing with angry texts. I ignored them until I finished the job, then stepped outside to check my messages. Bree. You bastard! How could you do this to me? Mel. You're going to pay for what you've done. Unknown number. Back off or you'll regret it. The last one was probably from Gavin. I saved all the messages, they might come in handy later, then called Mitch. What did you do? He asked, laughing. I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. Well, whatever you didn't do, it's got the whole town talking. Bree showed up at the diner this morning looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Mel was with her, and they were having some kind of heated argument. Then Gavin stormed in, and all three of them started yelling at each other. In public? In front of God and everybody. Martha says it was better than cable TV. Martha owned the diner and had a front row seat to most of Millfield's drama. If she was talking, the story would be all over town by lunchtime. What were they fighting about? Near as Martha could tell, Bree was mad at Mel for something. Mel was mad at you, and Gavin was mad at everyone. They finally took it outside, but not before Gavin called Bree a stupid bastard, and Mel told him to go to hell. I smiled. Sounds like their alliance is breaking down. Sounds like it. You want to grab lunch and watch the fireworks? Can't. I've got a job at the Prescott place this afternoon. But keep me posted. The Prescotts lived in one of Millfield's fancier neighborhoods, a development of large colonial houses with perfectly manicured lawns. I was installing a new electrical panel in their basement when Mrs. Prescott came down with a glass of iced tea. I hope you don't mind me saying, Eli, but I think you're handling this whole situation very well. I looked up from the circuit breaker I was installing. What situation is that, Mrs. Prescott? She smiled knowingly. Oh, come now. The whole town knows about your wife and that Russo boy. Frankly, I'm surprised it took you this long to do something about it. I'm not sure I follow. My daughter works at the bank, she continued, settling into a folding chair. She says Bree's been coming in for weeks, asking about account balances and withdrawal limits, acting very secretive about it. Then there's all those cash advances on her credit cards. This was news to me. Cash advances? Oh, yes. Thousands of dollars. My daughter couldn't say exactly how much. Privacy rules, you know. But it was substantial. She assumed Bree was planning some kind of surprise for you. A vacation, maybe. Or home renovations. More likely, she was planning to clean out our accounts before filing for divorce. I made a mental note to check our finances more carefully. Then there's the car situation, Mrs. Prescott continued. Everyone's talking about how you repossessed her Honda. Very clever, if you ask me. She's been borrowing cars from everyone she knows, but people are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? Well, if she's married to a man who owns his own business, why can't she afford to fix her car problems? And why won't she just call you to work things out? It's making people wonder what really happened between you two. I finished connecting the last circuit and tested the panel. Everything worked perfectly. Sometimes marriages just don't work out, Mrs. Prescott. Of course they don't. But usually, it's not quite so public. She sipped her iced tea and gave me a shrewd look. You're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, aren't you? I packed up my tools and smiled. I just fix electrical problems, Mrs. Prescott. Other people's drama is none of my business. But as I drove back toward town, I was thinking about what she'd said. Bree had been planning to take me for everything I was worth, but she'd been sloppy about it. In a small town like Millfield, financial irregularities didn't stay secret for long, especially when the person making them suddenly found herself the center of a very public scandal. I was pulling into the parking lot of the Lobster Trap when 3 people stepped out from behind a pickup truck: Bree, Mel, and Gavin. They'd been waiting for me. I turned off my engine and got out slowly, keeping my hands visible. Gavin looked angry enough to do something stupid, and I didn't want to give him an excuse. "We need to talk," Bree said. Her eyes were red from crying, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled. "About what?" "About stopping this insanity," Mel snapped. "About you acting like a grown-up instead of a vindictive child." I looked at the 3 of them standing there like some kind of intervention committee. "This should be good. Go ahead." Gavin stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. "You're going to give Bree her car back, you're going to stop spreading rumors, and you're going to sign an agreement to split everything 50-50 in the divorce. Or what? Or things are going to get unpleasant for you." I almost laughed. "Unpleasant?" "Gavin, my wife has been cheating on me for months, planning to divorce me and take everything I own, and making me look like a fool in front of the entire town. Exactly how much more unpleasant do you think things can get?" "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, moving closer. "I've got friends. People who can make your life very difficult." "Are these the same friends who help you afford that expensive boat on a car detailer's salary?" His face went pale. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know more about your business than you think I do. And I'm betting the IRS would be very interested in some of your creative accounting." It was a bluff, but it hit home. Gavin took a step back, and I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Bree moved between us. "Eli, please, let's just end this. We'll split everything down the middle. No lawyers, no drama. You can keep your dignity, and I can move on with my life." "My dignity?" I stared at her. "Bree, you announced to 300 people that our marriage was just practice. You've been cheating on me with this clown for months. You've been planning to rob me blind. And now you're worried about my dignity? I made a mistake." "You made dozens of mistakes. The only question is whether you made them because you're stupid or because you think I am." Mel stepped forward. "You can't treat her like this. She's a good person who made some bad choices. And what's your excuse, Mel? What kind of good person helps her best friend destroy her marriage?" "I was trying to help her be happy. By lying to everyone, including me, by covering up an affair, by helping her plan to steal my money." I shook my head. "You're not a good person, Mel. You're a parasite who feeds on other people's drama, and now that the drama's turned on you, you don't like it very much." Her face went red. "You son of a bastard." There it is. The real Mel, underneath all that fake concern. I looked at all 3 of them. Here's what's going to happen. Bree is going to sign the divorce papers I gave her. She can keep the house, since her parents paid for most of it anyway. She can keep her car once she pays the impound fees, and all 3 of you are going to stay away from me. "And if we don't?" Gavin asked. I smiled. "Then I'll stop being nice about this." I got back in my truck and drove away, leaving them standing in the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see them arguing with each other, their temporary alliance falling apart under pressure. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. Tommy Ricci. "I've got that information you wanted about Gavin Russo," he said. "You're going to want to hear this." Tommy met me at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, away from Millfield's gossip network. He looked pleased with himself as he slid a manila folder across the table. "Your boy Gavin's been busy," he said. "The car detailing business is just a front. His real money comes from insurance fraud." I opened the folder and found photographs, financial records, and what looked like surveillance reports. What kind of insurance fraud? The classic kind. Customer brings in a car for detailing, Gavin's crew accidentally damages it, then they file an insurance claim for way more than the actual damage. The customer gets a nice payout, Gavin gets a cut, and the insurance company gets screwed. I studied the photos. They showed Gavin's employees deliberately scratching paint, denting panels, and even smashing windows. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years, maybe longer. He's been careful, spreading the claims across different insurance companies, using fake names and addresses. But he got greedy, started filing too many claims, using the same customers multiple times. And somebody noticed? The State Insurance Commission has been investigating for 6 months. They're building a case, but they need more evidence. This folder contains enough to put Gavin away for 10 years. I flipped through the documents, bank records showing suspicious cash deposits, photos of damaged cars that had been detailed at Gavin's shop, even testimony from customers who'd been recruited into the scheme. "Where did you get all this?" Tommy grinned. "Let's just say I have friends in various places. The important thing is that it's all legitimate evidence, obtained through legal means. You could turn this over to the authorities right now, and Gavin would be arrested by tomorrow morning. But that wouldn't be nearly as much fun as what I think you're planning." I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" "Because I know you, Eli. You're not the type to just turn someone in and walk away. You want them to suffer the way they made you suffer. You want justice, not just revenge." He was right. Sending Gavin to prison would be satisfying, but it wouldn't undo the damage he'd done to my marriage and my reputation. I wanted him to experience the same kind of public humiliation that Bree had put me through. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "Well, Gavin's got a big ego. He likes to show off, likes people to think he's successful and smart. What if that ego became his downfall?" "I'm listening." "There's a classic con called the big store. You make the mark think he's about to score the biggest payday of his life, get him to invest everything he has, then pull the rug out from under him. With Gavin's insurance scam, we could set up the perfect trap." I thought about it. Gavin was arrogant enough to believe he could outsmart anyone. If we offered him what looked like the perfect score, he'd probably jump at it. What would we need? A fake customer with an expensive car and a sob story. Someone who needs money fast and doesn't ask too many questions. Gavin would see dollar signs and forget to be careful. And then we document everything and hand it over to the insurance commission with a nice bow on top. But not before we make sure everyone in Millfield knows exactly what kind of businessman Gavin Russo really is. I smiled. I like it, but I want to add one more element. What's that? I want Bree and Mel involved. They've been covering for Gavin's lifestyle, helping him look legitimate. They should go down with him. Tommy raised an eyebrow. That's cold, even for you. They made their choice. They decided to help destroy my life for their own benefit. Now they get to live with the consequences. We spent another hour working out the details. Tommy would set up the fake customer and the expensive car. I would make sure Gavin heard about the opportunity through the right channels. And when everything was in place, we'd spring the trap. As I drove home, I felt better than I had in months. For the first time since this whole mess started, I was in control. I wasn't just reacting to what other people had done to me. I was actively shaping the outcome. My phone buzzed with a text from Bree. "Please call me. We need to talk." I deleted the message without responding. We'd done enough talking. Now it was time for action. That evening, I went to the lobster trap for dinner. The place was crowded as usual, and I could feel people watching me as I found an empty table. The whole town knew about my confrontation with Bree, Mel, and Gavin, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Sally brought me a beer without being asked. "Heard you had some visitors this afternoon." News travels fast. Faster than you'd think. Frank DeLuca saw the whole thing from his truck. Says you handled yourself pretty well. I just told them the truth. Sometimes that's the most dangerous thing you can do. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. Word is, Gavin's been making some phone calls, talking about teaching you a lesson. I wasn't surprised. Men like Gavin didn't handle humiliation well, especially in front of women they were trying to impress. What kind of lesson? The kind that involves his cousin Vinny from Boston. Big guy. likes to solve problems with his fists. I nodded calmly, but inside I was calculating. If Gavin was bringing in outside muscle, it meant he was more desperate than I'd thought. It also meant I needed to move faster. Thanks for the heads up, Sally. Just watch yourself, Eli. Some people don't fight fair. I finished my beer and went home to make some phone calls. If Gavin wanted to escalate things, I was ready for him. But he wasn't going to like how it ended. The next morning, I called in sick to my scheduled jobs and drove to Portland. I had shopping to do, and I needed to make sure nobody in Millfield saw what I was buying. By noon, I was back in town with everything I needed for the next phase of my plan. Gavin thought he was dealing with a simple small-town handyman who could be intimidated into submission. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The trap was set for Friday night. Tommy had done his job perfectly. He'd created a fake identity for a wealthy businessman from Boston who needed his Porsche detailed quickly and quietly, no questions asked. The story was that the car had been damaged in a hit and run, and the owner needed it fixed without going through insurance for personal reasons. It was exactly the kind of job Gavin couldn't resist. I spent Friday afternoon making my final preparations. I installed hidden cameras in strategic locations around Gavin's shop, positioned to capture every angle of the parking lot and work bays. Tommy had already wired the building for sound earlier in the week, posing as a telephone repair technician. At 6 o'clock, I was parked across the street in a borrowed van, watching through binoculars as Gavin's regular employees left for the day. Right on schedule, a flatbed truck arrived with a damaged silver Porsche 911. The driver, one of Tommy's associates, unloaded the car and handed Gavin an envelope full of cash. Even from a distance, I could see Gavin's eyes light up. This was going to be his biggest score yet. What Gavin didn't know was that the Porsche belonged to an undercover insurance investigator, and every serial number, VIN, and identifying mark had been carefully documented. When Gavin's crew finished repairing it, the car would be evidence in a criminal case. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was what happened next. At 7:30, Bree's red Honda pulled into the parking lot. She got out, followed by Mel, and they walked into the shop. I'd been wondering if they were still involved in Gavin's operation, and now I had my answer. Through my earpiece, I could hear their conversation clearly. "How much are we talking about?" Bree asked. "50 grand easy," Gavin replied. "Maybe more if we play it right. This guy's desperate, and he's got deep pockets." "What do you need us to do?" Mel's voice. "Same as always. You're the customer's girlfriend, Bree. You brought the car in for detailing while he was out of town. Mel, you're the witness who saw the accident that damaged it. We file the claim Monday morning, and by the end of the week, we're all rich." I smiled in the darkness. They were giving me everything I needed, recorded in high-definition audio and video. "What about Eli?" Bree asked. "He's been asking questions and people are starting to talk." "Don't worry about your ex-husband," Gavin said. "Vinny's going to have a conversation with him this weekend. After that, he won't be a problem anymore." "You're not going to hurt him, are you?" There was genuine concern in Bree's voice, which surprised me. "Nothing permanent. Just enough to make him understand that he should mind his own business." I'd heard enough. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Tommy, giving him the code word that meant everything was proceeding according to plan. The second was to Detective Ray Morrison of the Maine State Police, who'd been working the insurance fraud case for months. "It's happening right now," I told him. "Everything you need is being recorded." "Are you sure about this, Eli?" "Once we move, there's no going back." "I'm sure." "Okay, we'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay out of sight until it's over." I settled back to watch the show. Through the shop windows, I could see Gavin and his crew working on the Porsche, carefully documenting the existing damage while actually creating new damage. Bree and Mel were taking photos and filling out paperwork, building the false record that would support their insurance claim. They had no idea that every move they made was being recorded by law enforcement. At exactly 8:15, unmarked police cars surrounded the building. Detective Morrison and 6 other officers entered through the front and back doors simultaneously, catching everyone inside completely off guard. Through my earpiece, I heard Gavin shouting, "This is harassment! You can't just barge in here without a warrant." "Actually, we can," Morrison replied calmly. "We have a warrant, Mr. Russo. And we have probable cause to arrest you for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering." The next few minutes were chaos. Gavin tried to run, but was tackled by 2 officers. Mel started crying and claiming she didn't know anything about any fraud. Bree just stood there in shock, staring at the handcuffs being placed on her wrists. I watched from across the street as they were all loaded into police cars. The silver Porsche was loaded onto another truck, tagged as evidence. Crime scene technicians began photographing everything and collecting documents. It was over. 6 months of planning, weeks of careful preparation, and it was finally over. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I drove to the Lobster Trap for breakfast. The place was buzzing with news of the arrests, and everyone wanted to know what I knew about it. "Heard your wife got arrested last night," Sally said as she poured my coffee. "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And yes, I heard that too. Insurance fraud, they're saying. Her and that Russo character and Mel Pierce. Who would have thought?" I shrugged. "People aren't always what they seem. That's the truth. You doing okay? I mean, this has got to be hard on you." "Actually, Sally, I'm doing better than I have in years." And I was. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The weight of deception and betrayal that had been crushing me was finally lifted. My phone rang. Detective Morrison. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "All 3 of them are cooperating. Trying to cut deals by giving up information about other people involved in the fraud ring. How much time are they looking at?" "Gavin's looking at 10 to 15 years. Your ex-wife and her friend will probably get 3 to 5 depending on how much they cooperate and whether they can prove they were just following orders." "And the money?" "We've frozen all of Gavin's accounts and assets. The boat, the cars, the business, everything. The insurance companies will recover most of their losses, and there might even be some left over for restitution to the victims." I thanked him and hung up. Justice wasn't just served, it was served with interest. That afternoon, I drove to the marina one last time. Gavin's boat was still there, but it now had a large, seized by court order banner stretched across the bow. A security guard was posted nearby to make sure nobody tried to tamper with the evidence. I stood on the dock for a few minutes, thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been a fool who trusted his wife and believed in his marriage. Today, I was a free man with a clear conscience and a bright future. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." I smiled and deleted the message. Yes, it was. It was completely over. I walked back to my truck and drove home to my little apartment above the bookstore. Tomorrow, I would start looking for a bigger place, maybe even a house with a workshop where I could expand my business. I had plans, dreams, and for the first time in years, the freedom to pursue them. 3 days later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the insurance fraud ring. The headline read, "Local business owner arrested in multi-million-dollar scam." There was a photo of Gavin being led away in handcuffs and a smaller photo of Bree and Mel in the background. The article detailed how the investigation had been going on for months and how the suspects had been caught red-handed in an elaborate sting operation. It mentioned that the scheme had defrauded multiple insurance companies out of hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. What it didn't mention was my role in bringing them down. As far as the public knew, this was just good police work and bad luck for the criminals. That was fine with me. I didn't need credit or recognition. I just needed justice, and I got it. 2 weeks later, I was installing a new electrical system in a house across town when Mrs. Henderson called. "Eli, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but whatever happened to that wife of yours?" "She's in jail, Mrs. Henderson." "Insurance fraud." "Oh my, well, I suppose that's what happens when people don't appreciate what they have." "I suppose it is." "Are you doing all right?" I know this must have been difficult for you. I looked out the window at the sunny street, at the normal people living their normal lives, and I smiled. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, I'm doing great. Better than I have in years. Good for you, dear. Good for you. I hung up the phone and went back to work. I had a business to run, a life to rebuild, and a future to look forward to. The practice was over. The real thing had finally begun.